Laura Heywood. Lin-Manuel Miranda, you are the man of the moment, the man of the hour, the man of the year.
Thank you. I remember being Conrad Birdie, and all the girls in the grade had to faint when I sang. And I said, I'm doing this for the rest of my life.
Maybe you've heard of him, NFL superstar, Hall of Famer Joe Montana.
The game is just so much fun. I always say I wish people could go out on the field one Sunday afternoon and play the game. And win or lose, just to get that feeling of what it's like out there. Because there's nothing like it, and nothing like it around.
Tony Robbins.
And I just started to cry. And I realized in that moment, this happened because I did what was right. I didn't do things for brownie points. I didn't do it for positioning. My heart knew was right, and I did it. And I was rewarded. It's like the money showed up.
But how is that different from me wanting to give my last paycheck to the Broadway show I want to invest in?
It's not different than that. If you did that once, it would be good. If you do it regularly, you're in trouble.
Fair enough.
Todrick Hall.
Todrick, I love you.
Thank you. You're so sweet. I think we're going to be best friends.
I agree. I'm
following you back on Instagram and Twitter right now, and it's going to be a BFF situation. You have no choice.
Welcome, Tori Amos.
Hi, Laura. What's going on in the world? We have to respond to that and work together every night, collaboratively. I think that's essential because it's important that we're sharing, yes, our stories, but we're also planting seeds.
Liza Koshy. You are both on screen and off, really setting an incredible example for the young people of today. And it's really been an honor to spend this time with you today, Liza.
I'm in love with you.
Let's get married.
Let's go.
On today's show, Laura Heywood interviews
Ty Defoe. Hey, it's Laura Heywood of Laura Heywood Interviews. And today my guest is the Jonathan Larson Grant and Grammy Award-winning musician, writer, educator, and multidisciplinary performance artist, Ty Defoe. Ty is the kind of performer I gravitate towards because he breaks so many boundaries and has dedicated his life to amplifying voices and stories of communities who are too often disregarded, overlooked, and grossly underrepresented, specifically but not limited to trans and indigenous voices. I first saw Ty on stage in Broadway's Straight White Men, notable because neither he nor the character on stage identifies as straight, white, or male, which was sort of the point. In addition to his Broadway work, Ty is the co-creator of Ajijaak on Turtle Island, a beautiful theatrical experience with puppetry and music that recently concluded its run at the new Guthrie Theatre on 42nd Street. He's also worked with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the Guthrie Theatre in Minneapolis, the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., and many more. He is a storyteller, a hoop dancer, and a shapeshifter, which I'm very excited to talk about. I want to read a quote from a 2015 article on HowlRound, in which Ty describes himself this way. In fact, actually, Ty, would you do me the honor of reading me this quote from the HowlRound article?
Sure.
Because you said it, so I want to hear it in your voice.
Well, I said I'm from the Ojibwe and the Oneida Nation, people of the Standing Stone. I'm Two-Spirit. I live in New York City. I'm a writer, and these ways of identifying are only parts of me, but as I move through the world, I find that I can take off my identities like a jacket and simply hang them in the closet. But my identities are interwoven, and in creating any theater that has a versatile multitude or humanity, I must lean into the intersections of my identity.
I am obsessed with intersections, and I see you as a person who lives in this unique center of your own Venn diagram. I think the Venn diagram is my favorite symbol. I love the idea that if we're doing uniqueness right, there's a way to draw a Venn diagram where each of us is the only person who is at the intersection of all of these individual things. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that can be lonely, but I think that that's also the way that we find our communities, because as we venture out into each subdivision of that Venn diagram, we find our people.
Oh, yeah. I like that we're talking about diagrams on a radio show.
I know. And I was also like, how do I describe this hoop dancing that you do on radio, too? Because I was like, can I pull an audio clip from this? Not really. So why not start there? Talk to us about being a hoop dancer? Because from what I understand, that's how you got your start as a performer. When you were barely walking, you were dancing.
Oh, absolutely. I think, the hoop dance, for folks that have never seen it or don't know too much about it, it's about a dancer that weaves in and out of these rings, these hoop-like structures that are like much smaller than a hula hoop. And so in the dance, the dancer will make different shapes in nature all the way from like a small blade of grass to like a giant soaring eagle. So this is something that has been with me. And in terms of diagrams and talking about shapes, the design of the circle has been really important because it talks about intersections, it talks about inclusion, and I also like to think about what's in the center of that hoop myself, but all kinds of other things that can talk about in regards to identity. It's almost like the ordinary meets the extraordinary, and that's like the crossroad. I think that each individual has their own hoop. So in the dance, folks can come check it out. I'll be at the New Victory Theatre this summer with a bunch of other amazing choreographers at New Victory Dance in July with some of my other collaborators, Marika Kent and Kate Freer. We're going to be doing a piece there around this hoop dance.
So when I heard hoop dance, I totally pictured a hula hoop, and I was surprised in seeking these videos, which are available on YouTube. If you just search Ty Defoe, Tydefoe, you can find it's like there are hundreds of hoops.
Yeah.
Is it 5 or 6 that are kind of connected together? And then the one that I watched over and over again was from a Pride event that you did. It was for people of color and LGBTQ Pride. Right. And there were like 12, about 12 piles of hoops that you, I don't know the language. Yeah. And actually that's something else I want to say right up front is I am so curious about you. And there's so much about you that is unlike anything I've seen represented in media, which is one of the reasons I wanted to bring you in. I'm nervous a little bit that in my curiosity, I'm going to accidentally use the wrong terminology, or that I am with completely the best intentions going to misstate something. And I want to invite you to help me and help the audience learn about the ways that you like to be referred, the language that we can use to represent your culture in a respectful, authentic way. I think so often people stay within the realm they're comfortable just because they don't want to accidentally offend, and so they don't approach. And so I'm leaning into my sort of insulated, sheltered kind of existence by inviting you in, and I hope that you will hear me with the intention that I intend. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I feel that way all the time in life. So it's actually really nice, and thanks for offering and saying that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I've had a broadcasting platform of some form or another for about 20 years now, which blows my mind when I think about that. And I really want to make it a point to invite people in who can teach me something and to acknowledge my own privilege in having a platform and helping use that platform to amplify the voices of people who are not like me. So,
snaps all around.
At the same time, from like the first time I saw you on stage in Straight White Men, I was like, I feel like you're kind of like me. Like I feel a kinship with you just because you have this light that shines from you. And I think I say my superpower is contagious enthusiasm, and I feel like you have maybe like I feel you're maybe a little more quiet than I am, and I'm saying this projecting onto you based on what I have seen in terms of your like characters that you play on stage. But you radiate light. I like that about you, and that makes me feel like maybe I do understand you, even if I don't know the words of the culture you grew up in, you know?
Yeah, no, thank you. Wasn't that fun? Like Straight White Men, like that whole beginning. I mean, I loved it because I got to have a personal interaction with so many types of people where I was like in people's faces with, Auntie Kate Bornstein, where we were just literally talking to people about music, how their day was. It was like such a great experience. So on levels of like being small and big at the same time. That's like one thing I really liked about working on that show.
So for people who didn't get to see Young Jean Lee's play, can you describe that opening? You know, the show starts basically as soon as the doors open.
Mm-hmm.
There is loud music playing. You and Kate Bornstein. Is it Bornstein? I've always said Steen.
Oh, really?
But you
Steen
know.
or Stein? I say Stein.
Okay.
I
mean, you know her personally, and I don't. So
she's great.
So she is a non-binary female pronoun using performer who is just talk about breaking glass ceilings.
Yeah, she's like my queer fairy godmother or something. She's just amazing.
So the two of you were interacting with the audience as soon as the doors opened at Straight White Men. And for people who didn't get to be there, describe it.
So people came in and the music was very loud, much like at a concert setting. And yeah, it was like the music was all of these like female rappers with explicit lyrics talking about like pussies and vaginas and like just taking over the world. And it was amazing. And, you know, people that go to the theater, especially on Broadway, were sort of offended and accosted by this loud sound. Although a certain generation of folks and people that go to concerts often loved it and were dancing around. So it really made people have a variety of experiences based on their personal identity and location. And so what I had to do is go around and sort of like check on people to see how they were doing. Oftentimes, if it was too loud, I handed out earplugs to people, you know, to just make sure everyone was comfortable as they started to watch the piece. Some folks really didn't understand it. To me, it sort of almost felt like a social experiment of sorts about what we were doing. I mean, I have like, if people, I have like logs of what people said to me during that show, from anything from, don't you know who I am? Or this is too loud, or bringing out their phone in regards to, you know, measuring the DPIs and the sound. Other people are like, is this happen every time I go to the theater? Can this happen every single time? So it was great. It invited a different group of people also that typically don't go to the theater, that don't see performances. So it was to me, it was utopic.
I loved looking at the faces of those quote unquote matinee ladies who were kind of being like, were like, excuse me, this is not what I signed up for. Yeah. And then you and Kate addressed that in your opening monologue.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what? They signed up to come see Armie Hammer.
That's probably the case. They're like, oh, I liked him in that Social Network movie.
Exactly.
But they also, I think that we are in an era where theater is not just for like old white people, and this play was a step towards that in a major way. Now, I read the script, I reread it nice. You know, to prepare us to, you know, I like to do a lot of prep when I'm going to talk to somebody, and your name is, and your story is in the script. So clearly it was written with you. I mean, not just in mind, like you must have actually written that, right?
Yeah, well, we had like back and forth, you know, working with Young Jean, who's amazing collaborator to work with. Kate, myself, and Young Jean and a team of people, we all like sat down and had conversations about, one, how we were identifying, how we would be talking to the audience, what exact language that we were going to say and how we were going to say it. Because when you think about it, also for maybe the first time in history, that this is the first time that there was also an acknowledgement about where the theater was placed on Broadway in terms of lands of indigenous peoples who are, you know, not here any longer, and then our heritage of folks who are here still living. So I think like that was, you know, because of American politics and things and the lack of apology with indigenous people, that was like such a huge moment, I think, that went by with a blink of an eye. So talking about the performativity, about how to utilize language and reverse tropes to give people information at the same time as welcoming people, like that took so long to do in 3 weeks.
So when this play is performed in other theaters,
Yeah.
will that opening be rewritten to be specific to those performers? Or is somebody going to be like, my name's Ty Defoe and I identify as?
I know, we should ask young Gene about that. Yeah, I'm sure it's to be tailored to people to do the opening. And I feel like that was one of the most beautiful things about that, is it allowed breath and space to have people that don't typically identify as straight white men in those roles, which was nice.
Yeah, I wish there was more of that.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you were playing yourself?
A little bit, but I think, in terms of layers of self, like even in New York City, when people like get on the subway or walking down the street, you are, right? You're yourself, but you're also different because you have shields on or barriers. Like, I like to think about it like putting on different jackets or coats when you're walking down the street. So I think when I was like performing dialogue that I worked on, that I definitely introduced myself in a particular way. Working with Anna Shapiro, we talked a lot about performance and what that means, especially performance to queer performers, people that don't operate in a type of binary, what that means when you're interacting with people on this basis where you have to show up by stewarding space and also taking some space for yourself.
I'm so glad that you are taking space for yourself, because I feel like what I see in your work is that the space you're taking for yourself is also for the generations of people that came before you. I know your heritage is really important to you.
Yeah.
I am conscious of the fact that I have no idea how to pronounce. I can't even pronounce the word pronounce. So where am I going to go with pronouncing these native words that that represent your culture? So can you give us a little bit of background so that I don't butcher the language?
Sure.
You can say it correctly and thus honor your heritage in that way?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. So, buju ani nej yayin gi jigendish na kaz waswaganin and dunjapa magizin and dodem. So I said, hello, everyone. My name is Gijig, which means, sky. And it's a storytelling name. And it means wherever I go, I make friends, or the grass turns green, and it's a storytelling name. And I'm from the Oneida and the Ojibwe nations. And the clan that I belong to in ceremonies and in my culture is the Eagle clan on my father's side and Turtle on my mother's side. And identify as Nij Manitawag, which means two-spirit. And this is an identity that I hold and walk with me very proudly.
And that's a way of saying that it's a non-binary gender descriptor, correct?
Yeah. People ask me, they're like, Ty, what does two-spirit mean? And it's it's a non-binary type of descriptor. It's more about transcending gender, or that gender is operating on a type of spectrum, right? And when you break that down in English, people are like, oh, this is, he, she, like man, woman, female, masculine. But I think two-spirit is sort of taking that and saying, well, yeah, you can identify as female and have these other traits that you like to do that is dictated by societal, quote-unquote, norms or a construct, and or vice versa, identify as male and, have those things be flipped.
One of my favorite sort of extracurricular activities, one of my favorite hobbies and things to read about is actually evolutionary biology, as weird as that sounds for like an extracurricular. But I am fascinated by the idea of the way human beings have evolved to think of something as categories. The very first thing we needed to do to survive was to be like, is it poisonous or is it edible?
Yeah.
And I guess you could think of that as a spectrum. Like there's the thing that kills you, there's the thing that just makes you throw up, there's the thing that gives you a headache, and then there's the thing that sustains you, right? But we neurologically have found ways to categorize, and often in a binary way, just for means of survival. And that's my theory of why so many people are uncomfortable with the idea of spectra, because our brains developed in a way that required us in the very early, caveman days to need things to be one or another as a way of understanding the world. We have transcended that now, but I think we've got to reprogram our brains. And two-spirit is such a beautiful way of thinking about it.
Well, I think what's interesting about this conversation too is thinking about also DNA and sort of what I refer to as blood memory. And blood memory is something that opens something up to a spectrum that has us remember things of our past from generations and generations and generations. If you can breathe 7 generations back, and if you can breathe 7 generations forward, I mean, that's like the imagination meeting history, right? And the crossroads of where you can operate at, be at, create at, and it's exciting. I think there's a movement going around about, decolonizing the mind. And someone most recently told me, a Two-Spirit elder, Carmen Lane, said, and with like colonization, she was like, our peoples don't separate the heart and the mind. Like, and when you relate that to making art, I mean, isn't that like a beautiful thing? Like your heart and your mind are together. They're not separate.
It's so crazy to hear you say that, because I had a revelation within myself about the heart and the mind, because mine are constantly at war. I grew up in a household and in a culture where cleverness and the brain smarts was the ultimate. Like you always wanted to be the smartest person in the room. And I was and am a highly emotional and very sensitive soul. And
what's your sign?
My sign, Taurus.
All right.
But I'm at the I think I maybe should be in Aries. I have an April birthday. I don't know. I don't really subscribe to astrology much, but I have an open mind. I have found that because, of course, I had to relate it back to science in order to make sense of it for me. But I like to describe it like we don't expect our liver and our kidneys to function the same way. They both take in the same sustenance. They both process that. And then they both have, a resulting end product. But we don't, if we looked at our kidney and expected it to work like our liver, then it would be quote unquote wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I've started thinking of the heart and the mind as similar. They both take in the same stimuli. They both process them. They both react to them and have an external, something that comes out of them. And they work, I like stereo headphones.
Yeah.
And when I was only listening to my brain as the truth and my heart as the irrational sort of anti-truth, it was like listening on mono or having one side of the headphones turned all the way down. And now I'm able to sort of listen to two lines of the same melody in my headphones, and the music is so much more beautiful.
Right? I kind of feel like the very thing that you described is like matrilineal, when I like think about only paying attention to like one thing and not valuing emotional intelligence, because if you apply those same skills to the brain, to the heart, in terms of value and mission, I mean, those things can be equal. I feel like oftentimes in a society that values patriarchy at moments, and I feel like now, because of where we are in history, folks have been undoing, and art has been a huge tool in undoing the value system of like this sort of heart and mind theory that we're talking about.
I think it's so lovely. And actually, so I do a segment on the show that I call Yes And, which is a nod to my love of theater and, the improv world, where you take what somebody offers you, you say yes, and so I have this fun little sound effect.
Oh, nice.
Yes, and. Yes, and. Yes, and.
And I learned something about you in my research that I had not seen in a ton of your press that you've done, which is that in addition to all of your performance, you're also highly educated and interested in the way that New York City is laid out, like the grid structure of the geography of the city and the difference between circles and squares. And I feel like this is related to what we were just talking about.
Oh, yeah.
That maybe the square is more like the patrilineal and the circle is more like the matrilineal. Does that follow at all?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, it's interesting, right? Like, because when we apply those same things to like urban landscaping of New York City, you always know where north is. Because like if you're downtown, you're like Central Park Or if you go into the West Village, there's all those like windy roads, and I don't know if you've walked through there and you're like, wow, I'm getting lost right
Totally.
now. Like, where am I?
In the West Village, you're like, how is 4th Street crossing 10th Street right now? Aren't they supposed to be parallel?
Right? And I'm like, oh, and it just like, for me, keeps it real because I'm like, I am also a conditioned person into falling into a system of needing like boxes and squares at moments, and where I'm falling into those, and then where I'm falling out of those, where I'm like, you know what? Actually, I need to like walk down this street and see Stonewall and see some beautiful trees and have a moment, take a breath, you know.
How did you get interested in urban landscaping?
I don't know. I think it's like by design. Like I think it's definitely organizing dances, you know, with like many groups of people, which I've had to do on some recent projects, and about how to shape and sculpt and mold. And I find that, I don't know, folks that do that, I think so interesting. I'm like, wow, what?
This is one of those times when I'm afraid I'm going to sound so ignorant. Do you refer to your ancestors as your people?
I do. I think I bring my people in with me to rooms oftentimes.
Is that who all those spirits that I'm
I'm sure like performers, you walk into a room and you're like, oh, you can just tell when people walk into a room. So before I go into rooms or anything, I mean, I have like rocks in my pocket, I have like necklaces on, and I got like my people with me, you know, like on my shoulders, standing behind me. So
are your people from Wisconsin, where you grew up? How do you trace your lineage geographically?
Oh, right. So, yes, my people, yes, and.
Yeah, woo!
Yes, and. Yes, and. Yes, and. Yes, and. Yes, and. Yes, and.
I have a love for Vikings. So, I don't know. I have this, like, kinship with the Viking folks and music, and that's
and you don't mean the football team.
I don't mean the football team. No. Oh, no.
I was like, Minnesota Vikings. Let's break it down.
Yeah,
nope, you mean actually like the Norse people.
Yes, like people of the North. I'm like, I am from north of the wall when people ask me. But I'm a descendant of Chief Buffalo, who did a lot for the Anishinaabe people in northern Wisconsin, also in Canada, Minnesota, Michigan. So that's where I trace my lineage from. And, you know, I grew up there in a small subsistence community with my mom and my community, and we would travel back and forth from the city to the reservation. My mom worked on the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is something for the United States about you know, finding culturally sensitive families for indigenous youth. And so I had tons of brothers and sisters running around growing up, people to play with all the time. So I feel like that's where I got real creative. And, you know, I mean, in northern Wisconsin, what do you have there? A beautiful lake, trees. Cheese.
Beer. I mean, when I think Wisconsin, I think cheese curds and beer.
There are cheese castles.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, cheese castles. But I'm lactose intolerant, so I'm like, ugh.
What is a cheese castle? I'm picturing like a Disney princess castle made out of blocks of cheese.
Pretty much.
It sounds good to me. I want to move there right now.
Wisconsin.
When did you move to New York?
So I moved to New York about, 4.5, 5 years ago. Before that, I was in Los Angeles. And yeah, it was great. So I went from West Coast to East Coast. I was like, I have to live this artist life. What is this all about? You know,
you're like the character of Ajijaak.
Yeah.
Talk to people about, or talk to me and the people who listen about Ajijaak on Turtle Island.
Yeah. So Ajijaak on Turtle Island is a show about a small whooping crane she nests in wood buffalo, way up in Canada, and due to the earth destructing and what humans are doing, Ajijaak has to make her journey, as she does every year in this sort of myth, fable, and story, which are three different things, which I can talk about in a second. Yeah. What she does is fly from the north all the way down to the south to Texas and flies back north again. And along the way, she meets indigenous people from different tribes, such as the Lakota, the Cherokee, and the Anishinaabe culture. And the story is that because of a fire, Ajijaak's parents had to flee and sort of leave her behind. So she has to find her voice, her song her personal medicine to make this journey so that she can restore language, listening, and balance for all living things. And along the way, there's a giant creature, serpent-like monster, Mijibiju, who is sort of following and chasing her. And Mijibiju is actually a metaphor, about the earth destructing. So she has to make the journey for all of us. And it was a puppet show. It was a family-friendly show. We had kites. We had dancing. It was amazing.
So you're referring to it in the past tense because the production here in New York has concluded its run.
Yes.
I assume that this is a show that will have, or as we were encouraged to think about it, an experience.
Yes.
There was actually a chief who welcomed us the night that I went, who said, it's not really. You can think of it as a show, but I encourage you to reframe it as an experience.
Yes.
And I was like, that really is.
Yeah.
It felt like we were all participants in as passive a way as anybody wanted to be, but we were invited in that way. What's the future for this experience?
Well, it got people really enjoyed it. We had like sold out performances, like so many youth from all the boroughs of like New York City came to see it. It had a tour life, and so we hope that every year the story could be told and go on tour some places. So, some theaters are checking it out, and that's so exciting because I feel as though the spectacle, we had like a 10, 12-foot crane at the very end that came out with wings, and
It was so beautiful. And you co-created it with Heather Henson, who is, of course, of the Jim Henson Hensons.
The Jim Henson. So a lot of the puppets in it were so magical, and I went in to talk story with some of these artists, and we talked about, what deer mean to the Anishinaabe people and what birch bark means. And so through talking story, talking about these objects and sacred object, these artists were able to sculpt some of these puppets, such as a deer falling from a tree.
Oh my gosh, that was probably the most beautiful moment of the entire thing. As you think you're looking at a tree, and then all of a sudden it
Deer
sort of
pops
just
out.
falls. It almost looks like it's deconstructing, but then it's an animal.
Yeah.
That, puppetry is so much more than like the Muppets, and I say that as somebody who could not possibly love the Muppets more. But it was more similar puppetry wise to something like Lion King, like Julie Taymor puppetry, even though it has that Henson name on it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the youth that came to see it and how family friendly it was, but this didn't feel like it was talking down to anybody, It's so smart and so artistic and beautiful. It's just as much of a quote unquote kids show as Lion King.
Yeah.
Youth culture, kids will love it. But I went by myself and I didn't feel like, oh shoot, I don't fit in because I don't have like a 5-year-old with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what it's meant for.
If people want to find out more about that show, especially if this program is available worldwide. So
nice.
We don't know where people could be listening from anywhere. If they want to find out how they might bring this show to their community, where would they find that information?
Yeah, just look online. It's ajijaak.com, and it's spelled AJIJAAK.com.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I bet if they just put Turtle Island Ty Defoe, they could also find it too.
Yeah, Ajijaak on Turtle Island.
And Turtle Island, it turns out, is where we are right now.
Boom.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Turtle Island is, if you pull out and like Google Maps, you can kind of see that North America all the way from the north, all the way down south in Central America looks like the shape of a turtle. So a lot of our creation stories in the north are based around Turtle Island, and we have myths and stories that talk about this. So in the show, there's a grandmother character that dispels a lot of these, truths that folks didn't know growing up in school, that actually North, South America, Central America, we refer to as Turtle Island. And this is the frame that we're going to be watching the show from.
The turtle is, if you're like you said, you zoom out on Google Maps, you'll see Baja California and Florida are like these two little flippers of the turtle. And I can never not see that again.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of home being something so all-encompassing. I think, we're in such an increasingly polarized world, and, red states and blue states and cities versus rural and all this stuff. But when you zoom out and you see we're all on the back of this one great animal.
Yeah.
And I love it. That brings me to something that I hadn't really thought of before, but sometimes that division that we're in right now is called tribalism. And from what I know of actual tribes, they actually live very much in harmony and peace with each other. Does that feel wrong to you, that tribalism is used as a word that to discuss the conflict between people right now versus harmony?
Well, I think like tribalism, we're sort of also placing a Eurocentric lens on what that is.
Totally.
And I feel like tribalism is good because it has folks identify so specifically about who they are, where they've come from, and is saying that there are many different tribes and or communities, right? If you put a framework on that, and that these things are good because you often then could trade things like stories, songs, dances, language, I think now people are referring to tribes as nations because of like the political, era that we're in right now, and how it's really important to identify sovereignty, and how land is really, really important to indigenous people, also to all people, because water exists in sovereign land. And sovereignty, like places at Standing Rock, are really holding and shedding a light on to the waters in Turtle Island in North America, that we need to keep our waters safe for all people, right? So I think that's why sovereignty, nationhood, and tribalism is really important, actually.
Just feels so ugly sometimes politically, the way that and I like the reminder. I'm glad that you brought up the Eurocentric definition, because I think it really probably is one of those things where there's definition 1 in the dictionary and definition 2, and sometimes words can have opposite meanings depending on who is doing the defining.
Yeah, like in Wisconsin, right? Like, I'll tell you a little story. My sister, I was behaving badly once, and she was like, "Ty, you're such a BRAT." And for a long time, I thought that was like, I was like, oh, what is she calling me? BRT? I'm like, a brat? She's like, no, a brat. And it's like, English is so confusing sometimes. I'm like, what?
If you were in Germany, you'd think she was calling you a bratwurst.
Exactly.
Sausage.
I was like, what's happening?
That's so funny. You said that you grew up in a small subsistence community.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That means, my family, for our food, we went fishing. Wintertime, we went ice fishing. There was a lot of like hunting. I mean, there was so many berries where I grew up and was from. So this is the way at which my mom chose, and she wanted to, have her kids eat food off of the land, because, the thought was that we are stewards of the land, and if we take care of the land will take care of us. Right? So to me, it was kind of almost like eating what people call now as organic.
Yeah. Well, it's even more than that. It's like, what are they, foraging?
Yeah.
That brings to mind, yet again, I'm leaning into my ignorance, that brings to mind sort of off the grid living. Were you living in, like, did you have electricity? Were you like living completely off the land?
Yeah, we partially, on weekends we would go to this place called the Roundhouse, and people are like, Ty, what's the Roundhouse? And I'm like, whoa, it was cool. To me, it was like theater. It was like an experience that I would go to, when we would literally sing and dance all weekend and have fun. I remember being a kid and being like, this is the most amazing thing ever, and falling asleep like under a bench or something while there was music still playing and drums still happening. So when I think about, the subsistence community, it was like, we didn't need electricity there. But the subsistence community on the reservation, there definitely was, things like electricity and water and things like that. Yeah. I mean, there were like water pumps, and we lived right off of Lake Superior, so it was easy to like get water. But yeah, it was almost like living with partial like things, and then partial not some of the times. But when we went to the city, absolutely had, all the plentiful plastic
course.
bags that we could imagine.
Okay, here's another question from my own curiosity. Are the words indigenous, native, and First Peoples interchangeable? And if not, how do they differ?
Right. So I think with that, people interchange them, and I interchange them too. I refer to like as indigenous sometimes depending on where I am, which room I'm operating in, like which social construct that I need to be in, and which word do I need to say to sort of break up or dismantle what's happening. When I say indigenous, that refers to something, right, without borders. That means like, because we as the United States have placed borders on it, like the government here. So indigenous is people that are one with the land, and the borders were placed on the land. Like it's just, something like this. So I use indigenous referring to that. I think First Nations are folks that the first peoples there of descendants of who are stewarding the land, who also another word, own. The word own in English is like, oh, this is mine, right? But this own is really hard to translate in any indigenous language. Like, it's like, what does own mean? Is this like mine? Like, what does that mean? And they're also the word for walls or borders. Like, what? Like, it just, there's no word for it. So it's almost like having to describe what that is. So I think, old school terms are like things like Indian, because it's like, well, when Columbus first sailed the ocean blue in 1492, came and thought he landed in India. And, so we're like, wow, we're not that. That's something else.
It's so crazy to me that we still use that word.
Right?
I mean, but in some places I've seen it reclaimed, like the Museum of the American Indian.
Yeah.
Like,
well, they're a government agency too, and the government is fraught with treaties and
I know
all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's like we're not from India.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't say we. I don't have any Native American blood, but I just, it's crazy to me that was so long ago and so wrong, and yet
isn't that wild? That's the system.
Yeah.
The system.
So let's not use that word anymore.
Yeah, let's not use that anyway.
Unless we're talking about India.
Yeah.
Which in this case we're not.
And something what I find interesting is that because of cell phones, iPads, computers, some folks are even, you will use NDN for like native or indigenous or like it's like
I've seen that written, but I never connected it to Indian, like in the phonetic NDN.
Yeah, it's like ironic, but
so
like a tweet.
It could mean, does it stand for native?
Yeah, it's like, oh, this person's like identifies as being native or indigenous or
but it's not an acronym for.
No, it's just like slang.
Yeah,
like you could probably find in the Urban Dictionary.
NDN. So you're like, it's pronounced the same. It's a homophone, but it is not actually Indian.
Exactly.
That's cool. Okay, so we're going to talk now about social media. This segment is called Tweets and Sass, which I hope people will hear like this.
Tweets and sass.
That is Mandy Gonzalez from Hamilton, who got the reference immediately.
Nice.
To A Chorus Line, the musical. The actual lyric is tits and ass, but we call it
tweets and sass.
And you are very easy to follow on social because your handle is the same across everything.
Oh, good.
It's just your name, Ty Defoe.
Just my name.
And here's what I've noticed on your social this week.
Okay.
You are a tease.
Am I?
Yes. You're like, new script, hashtag, it's like, okay, what is this script you're working on? Or you're like, screening of a new film, but you don't say the name of the film. It seems like you've got a lot going on that you're sort of talking about and sort of not talking about.
Yeah, I know. What is happening?
What's going on at the Musical Theater Factory?
Oh, so exciting. Musical Theater Factory. I'm part of the Makers Lab, which is exciting. It's a group of new musical theater writers that are making work, and it's this residency that we get for like a year and a half. Space, we get a group to do feedback circles with. It's just like such a wonderful experience. And if you have any new musical theaters writers out there, I encourage everyone to check it out. But yeah, it's a group of individuals that were picked specifically to steward this kind of space from different backgrounds, different cultures, making different kinds of musical theater for the future.
Mm-hmm. What are you making?
So at the moment, what am I doing at the moment? Well, I'm actually writing a pilot called Crazy Pants Tacos. And I don't know if it's
Well, I already want to watch it.
Yeah, it's a comedy.
Crazy Pants Tacos.
It's a comedy. And yeah, it's about a hipster food truck that takes place in Brooklyn, and different contemporary indigenous people will come to the truck to buy an Indian taco. So it's
like curry?
I know, exactly. That could be on it. That's a good line. So it's yeah, I think it's going to be really great, and it's going to dispel the myths of, you know, what Native Indigenous people are like, what people also from various genders are like. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also part of the Makers Lab, but also Trans Lab, which is exciting.
I was going to ask you about that too. Is that also part of Musical Theater Factory, or is it related to the public?
Yeah, it's something different. It's definitely for stewarded by the Women's Project, and MJ Kaufman and Kit Yan steward this kind of space, and it's a group of individuals that are working who identify as being trans or gender non-binary or non-conforming, to write pieces, which is exciting. And in that lab, I'm writing a piece called Trans World. And
I like that you sang it.
Thank you. So we'll see what becomes of it, which is exciting.
That's a stage piece?
Yeah, it's a stage theater piece. So
it sounds like Wayne's World. Trans World, party time.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm here for it. When you write the word trans, I've noticed you put a star next to it, or an asterisk.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Wow, I like that you called it a star. Most people call it an asterisk.
Well,
I like the star.
It's a little star.
Yeah, it could be like a little piece of glitter.
Totally.
Like trans glitter.
Sparkle.
Sparkle.
Trans sparkle. Yeah.
Exactly.
Why do you put that asterisk?
I don't know. I think I do it, to give people, like, to have folks stop. I feel like there's something interesting about changing the design of the eye and or like a sound. So I feel like trans is such an interesting label because it can mean so many different things. Like, it's such an umbrella term too. Like, most people might think that it's like, oh, transgender, you're like going from one thing to the next, which everybody is at some kind. But I think the asterisk to me makes people like stop and ask, or stop and say, hey, what are your pronouns? Even though you look like this today, what pronouns are you using today? How do you feel?
I'm so glad you brought up pronouns, because I am, like I said, I grew up in a very rural, intellectual world where they was definitely not a singular. And I have retrained my brain, and I have every time I catch myself going, the brain part of me going, they is not a singular. I go, okay, so I feel uncomfortable changing these rules.
Yeah.
But I don't feel anywhere near as uncomfortable as somebody does every time they feel mislabeled. So I can get used to feeling uncomfortable with the grammatical shift that's happening, because it is nothing compared to the discomfort that comes when I insist, because of my upbringing, that there are only two options for singular pronouns.
It's so true, though.
But you have challenged me in a whole new way and telling me that your pronoun is we. I know you say he, him, they, we, but how can I talk about you and use the pronoun we without, if I'm like, oh, we grew up in Wisconsin, to talk about you, how, but I didn't grow up in Wisconsin. Help me through this discomfort of redefining my own grammatical structure in my head without confusing myself and everyone around me.
I put that down most times when I'm working with people in collaboration, and or like my friends and stuff. I do use he and him and his, because sometimes, depending on what city I'm in, because, I have a man bun, I have long hair, depends if I pass or where I'm going. I use he, him. Other times I'll use they, or we, and we to me comes back to talking about the inclusivity of the circle, and somehow I think in the exchange of another person, it makes someone also question, sort of a process, a construct, and a direct action that we're having. So those three things, I think, assist in some of the work that I'm trying to do on an individual basis with using we. But yes, can often be confusing. And again, like the piece of glitter or the star on trans,
Yeah.
it puts okay, let's be intentional about the language that we're using, which is really important because our brain, as we discussed, fall so easily into colonized patterns of structure, and it breaks that pattern up, which I feel like is really important at this time.
I do really like the idea of what it conjures up in my heart when I say we are an artist. Like,
we are an
oh,
artist.
yeah, we are all part of each other. And while I don't think it would be accurate to say we grew up in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
I like the way it does make me stop and consider our interconnectedness. I mean, I want to say it's an Indigo Girls lyric about we are literally the air each other. Oh, maybe it's Ani DeFranco. We are literally the air each other breathes.
Yeah.
I breathe out, you breathe me in, and we sustain each other, and we are all part of this same organism. And so we challenges me in certain contexts to just think about the collective spirit, which I love.
Yeah, that interconnectedness, important.
I think the reason that I had the Indigo Girls on my mind is because of this last segment we're going to do. And why do we do this last segment? Well,
Just cause! Just cause!
we just do this segment just cause. And the reason is also because there are so many just causes in the world that we need to bring language to bring awareness to. And you have brought to me Honor the Earth, which is co-founded by the Indigo Girls, which is why they were on my brain. Talk to me about Honor the Earth.
Yeah, Honor the Earth is co-founded by the Indigo Girls and also Winona LaDuke. And if folks don't know Winona LaDuke, I would highly get on the TED Talk on YouTube.
I'm writing it
She's
down.
this amazing warrior woman that I think is phenomenal, who is changing how we, the world, I think even nationally here in the United States and Turtle Island, are thinking about food sovereignty, and how we all can have a voice with making direct action and direct change. Oftentimes people are like, I'm in my small community, or I'm off in the corner somewhere and no one's paying attention to me. But the way she frames talking about how we can take individual action, small ripples to be part of the whole, just really, really, I don't know, changes me. It gets to me at really in really great ways to activate what I need to do as an artist for culture shifting. So that's one. And then I think I had another one that
You did, but I wrote down this one. So tell me about, do you
sure.
remember the other one you sent me?
Yeah, True Colors.
Yeah.
Like the youth ensemble group that I follow, I'm a huge fan of, and it's with this theater company in Boston actually called Theater Offensive, out in your neighborhood. And True Colors is an LGBTQ plus theater youth group that they go on mini tours. They make theater pieces. They go into actual neighborhoods and do direct action with a lot of theater tools like theater games, like song, dances, poetry, especially for what's going on in the entire country here and around the world. It's a way for youth to express themselves utilizing theater. Like, how amazing is that? Like, people show up in neighborhoods and just do theater, and it's pretty amazing.
Speaking of young people in theater, is it true that the first theatrical performance you ever saw was a naked version of Gypsy? Because I am obsessed with that. It was like a brief reference in one interview you gave.
Yeah.
But if that actually existed or exists, I want to see it immediately.
So you asked what was in Wisconsin besides cheese castles. There's now as an adult, it makes sense because I'm like, oh, there are theaters across the country that do summer stock.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently it was a summer stock production in northern Wisconsin, a town that was about 15 to 20 miles from the reservation. And it must have been like just theater actors who were like, let's take off our clothes and run around the woods and jump on stumps and sing music from Gypsy, and then me later finding out what this music was too, like a musical theater piece.
I just wonder whether they like my Eurocentric theater maker mind is like, did they get the rights? And like, what did Stephen Sondheim think about that?
It's so strange, right?
But I also think, and don't quote me on this because I totally could be wrong, but I think if you're not charging ticket prices, the rights rules are different. So maybe Sondheim himself didn't have to sign off on.
Maybe they had like spoons and different things. I'm like, what is happening?
Find a way to put this into your pilot. I don't care if it's about a taco truck. I want the naked production of Gypsy to be in this pilot.
I was like, what? Oh, this is theater. Interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank goodness for them, whoever they were, because they set you on that path.
I know. I was like, one day we will meet. The theater world's small. Everyone knows each other. So it's like one day maybe we'll run into each other.
Well, you can follow Ty on social media, Ty Defoe, all of the things. TyDefoe.com is the website. And so if you are connected to that theater troupe from, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you'll, hopefully we'll hear from you. Oh my gosh, this hour has flown by.
It has.
I'm so happy that anything we missed that you want to make sure people know about you.
Let's see. Well, I have a fan page. If people want to like my fan page, that would be awesome.
On Facebook?
Yeah, and write to me. I love hearing from people and their experiences and what's going on. I try and keep up as best as I can. There's other projects too, and I'll post those on my website if folks are interested. I don't know. I'm a Scorpio. I'm on the cusp. I'm also Libra. I like rocks and gemstones and necklaces and fashion, and look forward to hearing from everyone.
Cool. Well, we will all be connecting with you. I'm so happy to have finally met you. I feel so connected to you, and that, we're all part of the same jam. Thank you so much for being here, Ty Defoe. And tune in on Wednesday when I have Tanya Pinkins in studio.
Yeah.
This has been Laura Heywood Interviews.
3 minutes to showtime.